All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminism is delendus est. Govern harder daddy. Female majority suffrage. Government instead of God. Collectivism instead of family. Feminization of institutions and woke communism, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The saber-tooth compliance check. Why your opinions are traps, your pain is invisible, and your competence is the only cure for the Marxist rot. I have sat across the table from a woman who, in the span of a single appetizer, demanded I lift a heavy box to prove my physical worth, and then immediately pivoted to asking my stance on a manufactured political crisis to test my ideological compliance. This is not courtship. It is a hostage negotiation conducted by a biological machine wired to extract maximum utility while offering minimum loyalty, a real-time assessment of whether I'm a capable protector or a useful idiot to be discarded. You see, the modern matriarchy does not want a partner. It wants a battery to power its delusions of grandeur. And when you run dry, when the divorce court strips you of your assets and the state cuts off your access to your children, you are thrown on the scrap heap of toxic masculinity. With the millions of boys abused in silence while the media screams about the plight of the oppressor. We are told that men are obsolete, that the state can replace the father and the corporation can replace the husband. Yet every time the power flickers or the tire goes flat, the instinct returns. She looks to you to govern the chaos. This commodification of dissent, where corporations sell you the rope to hang yourself with rainbow flags, is merely the logical endpoint of an ideology that views competence as a hate crime and hierarchy as a sin. They want you to believe that your willingness to endure their fake emergencies, the hysterical panics over climate change or social slights, is a measure of your moral character. But it is actually a measure of your submission to a reality that does not exist. We must weaponize the trivium to dismantle this illusion, to use grammar to define that a man is not a woman, logic to prove that equality of outcome is a mathematical impossibility, and rhetoric to laugh in the face of the woke mob, demanding your apology for breathing. The truth is that Western civilization was built on the backs of men who said no to the tyrant, and if we wish to survive this age of woke communism, we must rediscover the courage to say it again. To reject the gynocentric empathy gap that leaves our sons bleeding in the gutter, while our daughters are taught to victimize themselves. The siege of the soul, evolutionary shit-tesks, and the utility crisis. The candlelight flickered against the expensive wine she ordered before I even sat down, a subtle prelude to the financial extraction to come. But it was the sudden shift in her tone that alerted me to the real danger. She leaned in, dropping her voice to that conspiratorial whisper designed to manufacture intimacy out of thin air, and popped the question, "So what are your thoughts on the current political climate?" It wasn't an invitation to exchange ideas. It was a litmus test, a biological tripwire stretched across the appetizers. In the modern dating theater, this is the dinner table interrogation, a mechanism where she ceases to be a potential mate and becomes an agent of the state, probing my status within the secular leftist hierarchy. This is not idle chatter. It is a security clearance check. If I answer wrong, if I reveal even a scintilla of masculine independence or skepticism toward the catechism of the oppressed, the date ends before the check arrives. She isn't looking for a man, she is looking for a compliant subject for the matriarchy, and her questions are merely the border patrol checking my papers for entry into her reality. This interaction exposes the cruel mechanics of female selection, a reality we must confront with the cold, hard clarity of a syllogism. Major premise: women select for utility, meaning the instrumental value a man provides to her survival and status. Minor premise: utility is defined by the woman's immediate and fluctuating needs, which are subject to the whims of a culture that encourages caprice. Conclusion: therefore, the man is not a sovereign partner with intrinsic value, but a fungible resource to be consumed and discarded once his utility is exhausted. This logic is irrefutable and destroys the equal partner myth peddled by the feminist industrial complex. You are not loved for who you are. You are tolerated for what you provide. We see this in the abortion rates, where life is discarded to maintain lifestyle utility, proving that for many convenience outweighs the sanctity of life. When the utility crashes, the affection evaporates, leaving you as nothing more than a depleted battery waiting to be tossed into the recycling bin of history. We must strip away the romantic veneer to see the evolutionary hardware at work. These behaviors, the random topic questions, the sudden demands for emotional labor, are not social quirks. They are biological shit tests wired into her operating system by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Nature does not care about your feelings, it cares about genetic fitness. A woman is biologically wired to probe for weakness because a weak male in the ancestral environment meant death for her offspring. When she creates a drama out of nothing, she is stress testing your frame to see if you crumble. It is hypergamy in its crudest form, a relentless search for the high-status male who can navigate chaos without flinching. If you apologize, if you plead, if you seek to understand her irrationality, you fail the test. You reveal yourself as prey, and the statistics on paternity fraud, rates that hover in the double digits depending on the demographic, show that when the utility test fails or the fitness test is passed elsewhere, the contractual obligation of the relationship is often biologically subverted. Specifically, the trap of asking his opinion serves a darker function than mere curiosity. It is a compliance check, a dog whistle for ideological conformity. Imagine you're asked for your view on a complex social issue. If you answer with a unique reasoned thought drawn from your own faculties, you fail. You have failed because you revealed a dangerous capacity for independent thought, which poses a threat to the collective security she seeks. The only correct answer is the one that mirrors the fashionable lies of the day, the approved talking points of the cathedral. The man who parrots the narrative is permitted entry into the relationship, but the man who speaks the truth is exiled. This is the essence of the opinion trap. It is a filter to ensure that only men who have submitted to the emasculation protocol are allowed to procreate, filtering out the red-pilled men who see the strings. This brings us to the nice guy, a term spat at men with such venom by the leftist establishment. Yet these men are not entitled. They are simply victims of a breach of contract. We were sold a lie of meritocratic romance, that kindness, virtue, and provision would be met with loyalty and love. We played by the rules of the social contract our ancestors built, only to find the market rigged by female primal psychology and the welfare state. When a man realizes he has played the game honestly, while the system cheats him, his frustration is not entitlement. It is the righteous anger of a defrauded investor. This is evidenced by the suicide rate. Men are killing themselves at rates 3 to 4 times higher than women. A statistical scream of despair from a gender that has been told its utility is zero, unless it serves the feminine imperative. The pathology lies not in the man who expected a return on his investment of soul and labor, but in a society that incentivizes women to discard the providers for the exciting cads, leaving the nice guy to pay the taxes for children that aren't his. Even in the physical realm, the utility crisis manifests. Consider the modern demand for the gym date or the aggressive hike scenarios, where she demands a display of physical dominance in a safe, sterilized environment. This is a ritual to ensure the man can still kill the saber-toothed tiger of our ancestral memory, even though the only tiger she faces is the threat of a rude barista. She is subconsciously searching for genetic fitness and the capacity for violence, specifically, the protective violence she lacks. She needs to know that if the walls of civilization crumble, you have the raw power to defend her against the barbarians. It is a proxy for the capacity for violence, a necessary trait in a protector that the modern feminized world seeks to castrate out of you, yet she still demands it on a visceral level. So, how does a man navigate this minefield without losing his soul? We must employ the trivium defense, the classical arsenal of Western civilization. First, grammar. Define the terms of the interaction. When she throws a tantrum, identify it not as a crisis, but as a fitness test. Second, logic. Identify the fallacy. Recognize that her emotional outburst is a non sequitur to reality and requires no logical defense, only dismissal of the premise. Third, rhetoric. Respond with amusement rather than anger. When she tests you, do not engage with her emotionally. Laugh at the absurdity of the attempt. Do not try to win the argument, win the frame. By mastering these tools, you reclaim your masculine sovereignty, turning her evolutionary shit deaths into opportunities to demonstrate your unshakable dominance, protecting your mind from the siege of the soul. This betrayal strikes at the very fulcrum of our future, initiating a war that begins not in the workplace, but in the cradle. The bureaucratic state, having seized the monopoly on provision and protection, now views the male child not as a builder of civilization, but as a pathological anomaly to be re-engineered. We must trace the line from the ancient expectation of sacrifice to the modern chemical subjugation of the spirited youth, exposing the mechanisms of this abuse to forge a remedy in the iron of Stoic truth. The specter of disposability, ignoring the male child and the abuse narrative. History remembers the builders, the breakers of stone, and the bleeders in the trenches, yet conveniently forgets the silent contract inked in blood, male utility in exchange for posthumous glory and familial provision. We built the Parthenon and the Pentagon, laying down our lives like bricks in a wall, so that others could live comfortably behind them. This was the historical bargain of the West, a gritty exchange where disposability was the price of the social contract, a contract that has been unilaterally shredded by the modern bureaucratic state. Today, the state demands the sacrifice, the taxes, the labor, the compliance, but has reneged on the payment. We are expected to be the sturdy workhorses of civilization, the human plankton, yet we are stripped of the authority, respect, and provision that once justified our expendability. You are no longer a protector. You are a beast of burden to be taxed, regulated, and discarded once your utility wanes, stripped of the glory that made the sacrifice worth the cost. To survive this gauntlet, we must return to the Stoic shield wall, reclaiming the ancient wisdom that taught a boy his worth was internal, inviolable, and entirely detached from the fickle approval of the mob. The modern world tries to brainwash the male child into believing he is a broken girl, a defective female who needs to apologize for his nature. We must teach the young men of the West that their value is not contingent on female validation or state recognition. Marcus Aurelius did not need a permission slip to exist. He knew his virtue was his own fortress. By inoculating the boy against the psychological poison of gynocentrism, we give him an armor that the state cannot penetrate, a realization that his soul is his own sovereign territory. Walk into any modern classroom and you will witness the systematic chemical warfare waged against the masculine spirit. What was once normal boyhood, energy, rough housing, the urge to conquer and explore, is now pathologized by a feminist educational complex that views testosterone as a defect. They call it a disorder. They call it ADHD. I call it the chemical castration of the next generation. They dose these vibrant young warriors with Ritalin and Adderall to turn them into compliant, docile little workers, fitting them into a bureaucratic mold designed for girls. This is not education. It is an abuse factory designed to crush the natural instinct of the male before he can even articulate a defense, turning potential lions into obedient sheep for the slaughter. The Duluth model is not a theory of domestic violence. It is a manifesto of hate speech, a dogmatic religion built on the rotten foundation of Marxist oppression narratives. Logic dictates that if a theory claims all domestic violence is structural and patriarchal, yet ignores the vast empirical evidence of female-on-male violence, it ceases to be science and becomes propaganda. Through the lens of the trivium, we see the Duluth model fails the test of grammar and logic. It is a lie that erases male victims to uphold a narrative of female victimhood. By painting the man as the sole oppressor and the woman as the eternal victim, they have constructed a legal framework that destroys families and destroys men, utilizing the state to enforce a gender-based witch hunt. Consider the gynocentric empathy gap, the invisible engine driving the cultural Marxist machine. This is the neurological bias where a woman's pain is treated as a tragedy demanding immediate resources, while a man's pain is treated as a statistic or a joke. You see it everywhere. The women and children first protocol of the Titanic has morphed into a societal default that views men as oppressors in waiting rather than victims in need. This gap is why we have billions for breast cancer, but prostate cancer research lags, and why male suicide rates skyrocket while the media wails about microaggressions against women. It is the fuel that keeps the fires of Marxism burning, dividing the sexes to ensure no unified front against the state can ever form. The left screams about compassion and care for the vulnerable, yet it runs a psychological protection racket that demonizes the most vulnerable population in existence, the young boy. This is the care hoax, a contradiction where an ideology claiming to protect the oppressed simultaneously invents theories like toxic masculinity to bludgeon the male identity. They tell you they care, all while stripping boys of their fathers, their culture, and their purpose, leaving them adrift in a sea of confusion and self-loathing. They care only about the power they can extract from the suffering they manufacture, and they have targeted the boy as the ultimate scapegoat for the world's ills. Let us look at the cold, hard data that the mainstream media desperately wants to bury. Department of Health and Human Services data reveals a horrifying truth. Boys are disproportionately abused, neglected, and killed compared to girls, yet they receive a fraction of the empathy, funding, or media attention. This is the statistical gaslight, a massive cover-up of a silent epidemic. When you point out that a boy abused by his female guardian is ignored because of the Duluth model's bias, or that the suicide rate for young men is a catastrophic failure of the system, you are met with silence or derision. The media's silence on the plight of the male child is the screaming siren of a morally bankrupt culture, one that sacrifices its sons on the altar of political correctness and refuses to acknowledge the blood on its hands. We must drag these truths into the light and force the world to reckon with them. This solitary roadside repair performed in the glow of taillights, while my passenger oscillated between tears and demands for immediate safety, reveals an eternal truth embedded in the very architecture of Western civilization. Masculine competence constructs order from chaos, while feminine hysteria amplifies chaos into catastrophe. The fleshlight in my hand represented more than illumination. It embodied the trivium of logic, rhetoric, and grammar applied to reality. Where she perceived only danger, I recognized a problem requiring resolution. This fundamental polarity extends far beyond highway breakdowns into the very fabric of our collapsing society. The modern Marxist project can be understood as nothing less than the institutionalization of feminine panic, the demand that reality itself yield to emotional comfort rather than structural integrity. When we examine why leftist cities burn while their leaders weep about systemic oppression, we are witnessing the political manifestation of that same feminine breakdown response writ large across civilization itself. The subsequent portion will demonstrate how this dynamic explains why the left creates perpetual states of crisis and why their remedy is always more control rather than competence. The mirage of emergency, competence, chaos, and the masculine burden. It is 2 in the morning on a desolate stretch of highway when the universe decides to test your mettle, not with philosophy, but with a violent thump, 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 and the immediate loss of control. I remember a particular night, the air thick with the smell of overheating rubber, as the woman beside me dissolved into a state of absolute high-pitched hysteria. She did not see the physics of the situation. She saw only the terrifying void and immediately demanded that I do something to stop the fear, whereas I saw only a mechanical failure requiring a wrench and 15 minutes of labor. This moment is the perfect microcosm of the sexual divide. The feminine mind reacts to the disruption of order with a panic that screams for salvation, while the masculine mind responds with logos with the cold. Hard application of mechanics to restore the structure. She screams at the darkness. I simply turn on the flashlight. This polarity exposes the lie of rationalist feminism with the ruthless efficiency of a syllogism. If the premise of feminism is that women are equal in competence to men, then the conclusion must be that they require no external assistance to navigate the world. However, the observable evidence suggests the exact opposite. Every tenet of feminist dogma requires the heavy hand of the state to enforce it, from Title IX's tribunals in universities to quota systems in corporate boardrooms. We can construct the irrefutable argument, major premise: a system that is natural and superior does not require artificial coercion to sustain itself. Minor premise: feminism requires constant, massive legislative and judicial intervention to function in a world where it would otherwise fail. Conclusion: feminism is a regressive pathology, a parasite on competence that relies on the masculine state to forcibly impose outcomes that the free market of merit would never generate. Once you understand that female hysteria is a demand for male intervention, you see the exact same mechanism at work in every leftist political agenda. The panic is not a reaction to a threat, it is the weapon itself, deployed to seize the controls of society. We saw this manufactured hysteria reach a fever pitch with the climate emergency, a narrative built entirely on predictive models that fail as consistently as a weather forecast, yet designed to induce the same collective anxiety that a woman feels when a tire blows. The left simulates these emergencies: the pandemic, the wage gap, the existential threat of democracy, because panic creates a psychological vacuum where rights are surrendered in exchange for the illusion of safety. It is the same manipulation tactics scream that the sky is falling until the man, now played by the government, agrees to lock the door and take away the car keys. This brings us to the only metric that actually keeps civilization from crumbling into dust: the competence hierarchy. Nature, in its brutal indifference, does not care about your feelings or your intersectionality scorecard. It cares only about whether the bridge stands or collapses. When the left attempts to flatten these hierarchies in the name of equity, they are not fighting oppression. They are engaged in a war against reality itself. This is why their cities burn and their streets fill with trash. They have placed the emotional demands of the incompetent above the physical requirements of the infrastructure. If you put the person screaming about the tire in charge of the jack, the car never gets fixed. By attempting to eradicate the hierarchies of competence, the left is literally attempting to let incompetence rule, and the result is the inevitable decay of the Western canon into a dumpster fire of unpayable debts and broken social contracts. We must recognize this chaos for what it is: the ultimate feminine shit test on a civilizational scale. Just as a woman might manufacture a crisis over a trivial comment to see if her man can maintain frame and de-escalate the tension, the left creates these fake emergencies to test the strength of the culture. They create chaos not because they can't fix it, but because they want to see if we can restore order. It is a fundamental truth of the sexual dynamic. Men are the architects of reality, and women are the consumers of it. A woman cannot build a civilization. She can only inhabit the one men have built and critique the drapes. By constantly inventing new existential threats, the system is subjecting the productive male population to a never-ending stress test, hoping we will eventually break and submit to the government daddy, rather than fixing the problem ourselves. This brings us to the psychological replacement of the biological male with a welfare state, a shift that has atomized the family structure and left men as nothing more than tax mules. The state has effectively cuckolded the male population, stepping in to provide the resources and protection that were once the exclusive domain of the husband and father. Look at the statistics. Family courts award sole custody to the mother roughly 80% of the time, effectively reducing the father to a visitor in his own children's lives while the state enforces the financial extraction. Women do not need a husband to fix the tire anymore. They simply call the police or a government service, having traded the voluntary exchange of love and provision for the coercive extraction of the tax code. This creates a population of helpless, infantilized women who are addicted to the dopamine hit of state intervention, looking to the bureaucrat instead of the mate to solve the problems of existence. The only remedy for this descent into chaos is the reclamation of the masculine burden through the mastery of the trivium. In the face of the screaming lady and the burning society, the man must employ logic to assess the emergency, stripping away the emotional overlay to see the mechanical truth of the failure. He must use grammar to issue the necessary commands, the stay, calm down, and hand me the iron, that reasserts order over hysteria. Finally, he must wield rhetoric to soothe the collective panic, to speak the beautiful lie that everything will be fine because he is in control. This is the essence of the govern harder dynamic, the masculine imposition of will upon the chaos. When the tire blows and the world panics, you do not ask for a committee report, you simply get to work. We must be the ones to turn on the fleshlight, jack up the car, and tighten the lug nuts, because if we leave it to the hysterics or the state, we will simply sit in the dark until we die. I see the puppet strings attached to the boardrooms, but I must drag your gaze to the even filthier reality beneath them. The rebellion itself is a product. This uprising is not a war for the oppressed, but a tantrum of the useless against the useful, a slave morality where the deformed attempt to legislate beauty out of existence. Do not be fooled by the theater. They are not bowing to the mob. They are feeding it manufactured outrage to keep it distracted, while the merchants of Babylon sell us the rope to hang ourselves with. The fetish of dissent, corporate wokeism, and the hollow rebellion. The balance sheet is the only scripture the corporation worships, and lately, that scripture has been rewritten by the state. We are told to believe that billion-dollar entities, cold-blooded, profit-maximizing machines, suddenly developed a conscience for social justice. This is a fairy tale for the simple-minded, a fabrication to hide the ugly truth of our capture. Consider the irrefutable syllogism of the market. Major premise: the corporation exists solely to generate profit for the shareholder. Minor premise: woke cultural stances consistently alienate the core customer base and lose money on the bottom line. Conclusion: therefore, these corporations are not adopting progressive ideology out of moral goodness, but to secure regulatory favor and avoid the crushing hand of the state. They are not private entities. They are the enforcement arms of a bloated totalitarian government apparatus. When a bank freezes your account because you tweeted a meme, or a tech giant censors your speech for misinformation, they aren't being social justice warriors. They are executing the will of their political masters to keep their charter and their stock options safe. This brings us to the nature of this so-called rebellion, a farce played out on the national stage by the incompetent against the excellent. Look closely at the faces screaming for equity on your TV screens and in the HR meetings. This is not a war of the oppressed against the oppressor. It is a revolt of the ugly against the beautiful, of the mediocre against the capable, of the barren against the fruitful. It is the ultimate manifestation of the evolutionary biology of the weak. Recognizing they cannot conquer the strong through merit or intellect, the weak seek to invert the natural hierarchy using the state as a bludgeon. They dress up their jealousy as justice and their biological inadequacy as systemic oppression. It is a collective tantrum from those who failed the test of natural selection, demanding the referee change the rules of the game because they lack the speed and strength to compete. It is slave morality in its purest form, a poison that seeks to drag the eagle down to the level of the slug so the slug can feel like a predator. Rainbow flags fluttering above corporate offices might suggest commitment to civil rights, but that's a deception. These symbols serve as protective barriers against federal oversight and public pressure. Corporate displays of social consciousness function primarily as financial safeguards, expensive insurance policies, shielding against discrimination lawsuits and regulatory penalties that could otherwise lead to bankruptcy. Environmental, social, and governance ratings don't reflect ethical principles. They operate as compliance measures for an emerging ideological regime. Diversity executives exist not to improve workplace culture or encourage creativity, but to ensure organizations pay homage to prevailing social doctrines. This represents a business expense in a society where submission to false narratives has become the dominant form of exchange. We are witnessing the economic fulfillment of the revelation of John. I look at the modern marketplace and I see the whore of Babylon drunk on the blood of the saints, trading in the bodies and souls of men. It is a deceptive web of buying and selling lies. The truth is watered down, pasteurized, and sold back to us in plastic bottles for a premium. The corporations have become the merchants of the void, selling you a simulacrum of meaning while they hollow out the culture from the inside. They do not care about the marginalized or the working man. They care only that you buy the lie, because the lie keeps the machine running and the shareholders wealthy. They have replaced the divine with the dollar and the dollar with the diversity score, a triad of deception that would make a Babylonian king blush. Consider the absurdity of Ben and Jerry's or Nike peddling Marxist aesthetics to the very useful idiots they oppress. It is a snake eating its own tail, selling the rope to hang itself. The irony is lost on the consumer, who wears the Che Guevara t-shirt made by a 12-year-old in a sweatshop and thinks he is sticking it to the man. The corporation has commodified your dissent, packaged it, and sold it back to you at a 500% markup. They have monetized the revolution, turning your rebellion into a mere lifestyle choice, a flavor of the week to be consumed and forgotten before the next quarterly earnings call. This is the magic trick of the age. They sell you the illusion of resistance while you are shackled to their supply chain, a slave who thinks he is a revolutionary because he bought the right sneaker. Beware, for the beast is adaptive and seeks to consume all. It sees the manosphere waking up and it seeks to commodify us next. The red pill is in danger of becoming a product, a t-shirt, a Patreon subscription, stripped of its philosophical transcendental power. If you buy your masculinity from a corporation, you do not own it. You are merely leasing it from the same system that seeks to destroy you. Do not let the enemy dictate the terms of your awakening. When Amazon starts selling based merchandise, the revolution is dead. We must refuse to be a demographic to be harvested. We must refuse to let the market dictate our reality. The truth is not a commodity. It is a weapon, and we must wield it ourselves, unsold and uncorrupted. So, what is the remedy? You cannot fight a hydra by cutting off its heads. You must starve it. We must withdraw our consent, build parallel structures, create art, business, and families that exist entirely outside the corporate commodification matrix. Embrace the living spirit of the West, the spirit of the cathedral builder and the pioneer, not the corporate serf. Do not ask the system for permission to be a man, simply be one. Forge your own path, separate from the Babylonian merchants, and watch their false kingdom crumble into the dust of history while we build the new world on the bedrock of truth, beauty, and unyielding masculine virtue. You have seen the code of the matrix, and now you cannot unsee the grotesque machinery grinding men into dust. We ripped the mask off the shit test and exposed it for what it is. A crude biological subroutine designed to stress test your utility, ensuring you are strong enough to kill the saber-toothed tiger, even if the only danger is a flat tire or a difference in opinion. You watched as the state positions itself as the ultimate alpha male, replacing you with a welfare check and a police officer, stripping you of your divine purpose to protect and provide. We witnessed the boy left behind in the ditch of history, his abuse ignored by a culture that weeps for fictional oppression while the male suicide rate spikes in a silent scream of agony. The facts are undeniable from the family court slaughterhouse that turns fathers into visitors to the corporate whores selling you a fake rebellion to keep you sedated. I have handed you the keys to the trivium, the ancient armor against the modern dragons of cultural Marxism. You now know that when she simulates a fake emergency, she is begging you to govern harder, to impose order on her chaos, and that your competence is the only thing holding back the entropy of the universe. Do not let this truth sit idle. Use it to deprogram the blue-pilled zombies around you, to laugh in the face of the woke corporate lies, and to build a life where your value is internal and inviolable. You are the inheritor of the greatest civilization the world has ever known, a bastion of reason and strength, and it is your duty to rise, reject the script of the victim, and spread this contagion of truth until the spell of ignorance is broken forever. And now the sponsored book introduction, Govern-Hearted Daddy, Female Majority Suffrage, Government Instead of God, Collectivism Instead of Family, Feminization of Institutions, and Woke Communism. Look around you and witness the crumbling edifice of a civilization that once dared to reach for the stars, now reduced to a sobbing nursery for the eternally offended. You feel it in your bones, that suffocating sensation of being a stranger in a land your forefathers bled to conquer, a land that now demands your apology for the very competence that sustains it. I have walked through the wreckage of our institutions, from the university campuses where grammar is branded as violence to the corporate boardrooms, where mediocrity is worshipped as diversity, and I have seen the enemy. It is not merely a political movement. It is a metaphysical disease, a gynocentric rot that seeks to murder the father archetype and replace the logos of God with the shrieking, inconsistent whims of the feminine hive mind. I wrote this manifesto because I watched as the state usurped the role of the husband, transforming men into disposable tax livestock whose only purpose is to fund a system that hates them. And I refuse to silently accept the castration of the West. This volume is not a comfortable collection of platitudes designed to coddle your fragile ego or validate your victimhood. It is a jagged pill of bitter, immutable truth that will shatter your illusions and rebuild your psyche from the ground up. You are about to embark on an intellectual journey that will arm you with the syllogistic sword necessary to dissect and eviscerate the leftist illogic that has infected our collective consciousness. We will strip away the historical revisionism that hides your glorious heritage, proving empirically that the current welfare order is nothing more than a systemic parasitism, a massive wealth transfer from the productive male to the net negative tax consumer. Within these pages, we expose the Men Kampf propaganda war, the demonization of masculinity, and the satanic drive to erase the stoic virtues that built the modern world. You will learn why the female voting bloc signals the end of the Republic, and how the abortion of civilization is being performed on the altar of Moloch under the guise of choice. Understand clearly, this work is strictly for the man who has been betrayed by the misandrist cult of female supremacism, the man who is starved for logic, hierarchy, and the raw, unfiltered reality of biological caste systems. If you're a man who senses the spiritual rot, who knows that equality is a lie designed to placate the incompetent, and who yearns to reclaim his sovereign will as the architect of civilization, then this book is your new Bible. It is for the builders, the protectors, and the thinkers who are ready to master the art of war and the Stoic sage's discipline to forge a parallel society free from the corruption of the woke hydra. By reading this, you will gain the ability to construct an impenetrable mental fortress against the psychological operations of the media state complex and learn to steer the ship of Western civilization back toward the golden age. However, if you are a creature of the left, a delicate soul who confuses offense with harm, or one of the shrill acolytes of the solipsistic goddess who believes feelings trump facts, do yourself a favor and stop reading right now. Put this book down, go back to your safe space, and continue wallowing in the neurotic delusion that your emotional incontinence is a substitute for competence and truth. The content contained herein is far too potent for your fragile constitution. It is a dose of pure, unadulterated reality that will send you spiraling into a meltdown of epic proportions. This text is not for those who wish to be coddled. It is a weapon of war for those ready to seize their destiny. And if you cannot handle the heat of objective truth, you have no business here. Go find a hobby that suits your temperament, like knitting or posting selfies, and leave the heavy lifting of saving civilization to the men. For those who remain, steel yourself. We are going to dismantle the gynocentric lie, reject the indoctrination centers that seek to chemically and culturally castrate our sons, and establish a new order based on the laws of nature and hierarchy. You hold in your hands the blueprint for the Patriarch Protocol, The roadmap to 1,000 years of glory where truth reigns supreme and the masculine spirit is finally unshackled. Read this, internalize it, and prepare to govern harder than ever before. Govern harder, Daddy. Female majority suffrage. Government instead of God. Collectivism instead of family. Feminization of institutions. And woke communism, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.